Outer Orange.
It's been about a year since I've last posted a popping deck of something that I've performed pretty well with, and today we have a Shadowverse Evolved top 4 deck that I took to Springfest Duluth with my team, with my teammates Tyler and Di, who are playing Abyss and Dragon, and overall we actually all did really well, and honestly I think it was a really great time, and I'm here to tell you guys about the top 4 Haven Fable list that I took to this particular event, why I took it, my matchups, how the deck works, and the deck profile and all that kind of fun stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. Previous Steve, welcome back. All right, we are now back at my card screen. This is Haven, so as you can tell, this is the Haven craft right here. This is Alice, just to you know show the Fable part. But today we're gonna be talking to you guys about this deck. Chose this deck. Honestly, it's kind of wild to think about that. Out of every deck I could have picked, I chose this one, considering I did play Shadowverse for a very brief week or two, where I was on Forest and Sword, and I didn't really like it. It was like set 1 stuff, and then I went from that to this crazy ass deck, which by the way is pretty high ceiling. It's a pretty hard deck to play. And by the way, I only have a little over a month of experience, I would say, on Shadowverse period. I decided, hey, why not relearn Shadowverse? That's what I did, and I had both my boyfriend helping me a lot, get me cards and all that kind of fun stuff, on top of my good friends and my locals get me cards and kind of help me understand the game. And big shout outs, by the way, to my boyfriend and my locals for helping that, along with my third teammate Di, who was also helping me a lot with kind of understanding. He came like a couple days earlier, and basically was testing with me. I was teaching him Vanguard, he was teaching me Shadowverse, which is also just really cool. And then also just again, just big shouts to everyone that's been helping me out, helping me understand the game to be able to get this far, because I'm not gonna lie, this is a hard deck to play, and as someone who just randomly picked this card game up, this was probably one of the hardest decks I probably could have, not the hardest, but it was definitely a hard deck to pick up, and the fact that I was able to do pretty decent on it. Hi, OuterOrange here. I forgot to mention why I took the deck. So if you guys don't know, I'm a big Alice and Wonderland fan. That was originally what got me interested in wanting to try the deck, and then once I tried the deck, someone told me that in Haven it's like the strongest. I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll try that out. And then I absolutely fell in love with the deck, and that's basically the reason I decided to try it. And then because I had the most experience on the deck, I decided to take it, even though I was a little scared of how it might perform, because it can be a little high. Let's go ahead and talk about the deck here, and we're gonna kind of start with the low drops. I gotta go to high drops, then we'll talk about the evolves and kind of my decisions of why I pick certain things. The easiest one to knock out here is definitely the Bellringer. Bellringer is just such a staple in most decks. There are some decks that can cut this card or run less of it, but for the most part, you really want to see this card, especially into matchups like Sword, matchups like early aggro, matchups like Abyss. There's just some matchups where you have to play this card in a very particular way to where it helps you win the game, basically. Rather it is as a war target, because that's what she is. She's a war. She also has an evolve, that's not too bad. She also lets you draw a card if she dies. Long story short, this card helps you a lot in those situations where you are really in a pickle. There are some weird niche interactions with this card you can do. If you evolve her, you can do some weird interactions. It's kind of hard to explain. You can swing in into something just to draw if it's been like a turn or two, so that's another thing you can do. Evolve sometimes does come up, though I don't play it. I did play it, but I had to take it out, unfortunately. Can't exactly explain it because it changes from like game to game, but there are just some little stuff that you can do with this card that really help. Key on Prayer, originally I was running this card and then I took it out and then I put it back in because I found that you want to play as many low costs as possible in Fable Egg, basically, or Haven Egg, whatever you want to call it. Long story short, you're going to discard your hand at some point. You might as well utilize your mana as much as possible, with as much as possible that you can do this with. But what I mean by this is you want to get as much damage in, you want to be able to do as much as you can between whatever turn you're on to basically closing out the game. And cards like these really help, because even if you were to discard your hand, you can play this amulet and kind of leave it on the board, and then you can crack it after you explode, which really helps with the Humpty Dumpty synergy, as it lets you get 2 damage in while also getting 3 damage off the egg, and it also be able to play stuff. And it also, this card can like knock out like silly wards or something like that. You can swing this into a Bellringer. As we discussed earlier, this is a very annoying card to play around a lot of the times. I will say try to crack this as early as possible. Like, you want to crack it when you need it most, but keep in mind Bahamut is the card, exists in Dragon, and Bahamut does explode amulets, so you want to just make sure that you crack your amulets before you do anything. So just something to keep in mind. That's another reason why I didn't play another deck, like I didn't play like Haven Amulet or anything like that, because those decks are just a little too slow, and into decks like Dragon you just kind of auto lose, and you don't want that happening if you're spamming amulets just to get them basically destroyed. Also keep in mind Execution is also a card. Execution can blow up cards like these, so you definitely gotta be careful. Rhea is part of this Fable package that we'll be talking about here shortly. Basically, this is a package that lets you put random counters on cards. They're not random, but they're counters. They don't really have like a thing to them, and you just take like basically anything You take like one of these and you just put on something, it's a counter. The counters get removed to do effects. That's kind of the point of the deck. That's why it's called like Fable Egg Haven, or Haven Fable technically is the name of it. But this card lets you basically rest her in order to give something else a counter. This is very important as we're going to be playing cards that wants to use these counters. So she's basically used for that. Early on, she's also really good as you can just plop her down and swing with her. And you'd be surprised that that is actually very useful. Sometimes people can't answer her early if they don't have the ward or the bell ringer and they have to just eat 2 damage. Maybe they'll eat 4 damage total. That just depends. Also, you might think like, oh, well, what, she gets sniped? That's perfectly fine. She's in now your grave, and then you can use her in your grave in order to bring her back later on if you need her. Because yes, this deck does revive. There's another reason I really like this deck, because it also has revival potentials. So long story short, you can also get her out, so it's not a big deal. Usually if I see these cards, I'll play them early and I'll just use them. Again, I play this deck a little rush heavy, so I usually, if I have 1-drops in my hand, they are not going to be in my hand for long. They'll usually be coming down to the board. Next we have Andromeda. This is a new addition to the set 4 version of Egg Haven. Basically, this card says for the rest of your turn, your leader and each follower currently on your field, including this one, this doesn't take any ability damage. Basically, what this means is you can call a bunch of dudes and then call her last, and then she basically gives the effect that other stuff can't be killed. So if you're playing cards like Humpty Dumpty, and Humpty Dumpty blows up everything on the board, by the way, this card says, hey, your board gets to stay, but your opponent's board gets to die. This is very important as there's a lot of, you'll be exploding a lot. You want to keep a board state. Sometimes you get to call your whole hand out. And basically, this card just says your board stays, which usually your opponent won't have an out to unless they're playing cards like Conflag, or like I said, most dragon or spells or cards like Decree, Aculet's Light, you know, just cards that can banish stuff and kind of remove. Big board removals are good. There's the banish card in Dragon that's really good that kind of deals with this, but like that's a late game card. Long story short, if they can't answer the board, they'll lose. Usually, if you open up this and the Humpty Dumpty, you'll win the game. However, you have to time it perfectly, and that's probably the hardest part about this deck, is timing those types of things perfectly. So that's basically that. And then next we have our 2-drops. I'm running 2 Snow White. I used to have this at 3. At some point I had 0. I kind of jumped this card around a lot. Eventually I decided 2 was a pretty good sweet spot. I'm not a fan of 2-Os, but hey, we gotta do what we gotta do. Basically, this card is just a ward, but she has a couple abilities. If you play her from hand, she gets a little Fable counter. And then basically what happens, if she were to get destroyed, you take the Fable counter off and move her into the EX zone. The EX zone is going to be a very useful tool here for this deck, because your EX zone is basically, as a lot of people have told me, like a second hand that you get to utilize. So basically she doesn't fully die. She'll disappear, go into the extra zone, and then you can bring her out from the extra zone. So basically if you kill your board, or if your board gets blown up by your opponent, you can then bring her back out by removing the Fable and you're good to go. Also, if she comes out from anywhere that isn't your hand, she also becomes a 3/3. She gets +1/+1. Long story short, she's also a 3/3 attack and ward. You can also, this is my favorite part about her, you can just call her out early on, not ward her, and then next turn you can swing for 2. So if they don't have the ward, they're taking 2, and then she gets warded, she wards herself. And then also if your opponent has a bell ringer, you can swing her into the bell ringer or something else into the bell ringer, and then her to face to just get the 2 damage in. Again, getting damage in is just very important. Next, I run a card that a lot of people really judge me. Not really necessarily judge me, but they're like, why? This is Mainu. Now, Mainu was something I discovered through Discord. There's a Shadowverse Discord server, like a pretty popular one actually, and in there, I was testing Shadowverse because, you know, my boyfriend and Jalen and Di aren't always going to be available. So I needed more testing partners, you know, just places to kind of, especially since I was only working with about a month, you know, the event was coming up pretty soon. I needed to work fast here. I needed to learn this game pretty quickly. I'm not going to lie. I'm definitely nowhere near perfect. I'm definitely still learning. But this card was, I faced a mirror. I can't remember the person's name, and I'm so sorry that I can't remember your name, but if you're watching this video, please feel free to comment and let your name be known, because you're the reason that this card basically saved me a lot of my matchups today, and I highly appreciate that, so thank you. But this is Mainu. Long story short, this card just says aura, and then the evolve of this card also says aura. Now, why is aura important? Aura basically says this card can't be targeted, so it can't be damaged by AoE type of spells, like Conflag is a good example, but it can't be directly selected by stuff. So basically, if you want to burn something, if you want to just deal something damage, you can't target this card. If you want to bounce it back to hand, you can't bounce it back to hand. A good example, because this is where this card comes up a lot in, is Rune Chimera. Chimera literally can't touch this card. A lot of what they do requires them to play spells, and if you drop this card, they can no longer play spells. There's some Uma cards that just can't directly target this. There's quite a few examples. A Discard Dragon is another example. They actually can't target this card, funnily enough. I faced a Haven Amulet deck today, and funnily enough, I had no idea just how hard this deck played around that deck. Their entire deck is focused on like burning and doing damage and all this stuff, and this card just says, no, you can't do that anymore. Another example is Forest. Forest is a very big advocate of pinging, and like by pinging I mean like damaging you for one, damaging you for one, damaging you for one. They do a lot of small baby pokes, and while this card's on the board, they can't do a lot of those baby pokes. So if you early on just call like 2 of these, basically you're in a safe zone. You can also call 2 of these, call Ward, swing with them, and you're basically good to go. Again, back to the Haven Amulet player, I felt really bad because the game felt very one-sided, and there's nothing the person was doing. It's just kind of, I opened 2 of these, and there's just I didn't even know. I was just playing them because I didn't have anything else to really play because I opened these cards, and I was thinking like, oh, maybe I'm in trouble here. I didn't know what the deck I was facing, but then I realized as I was playing these that he couldn't get them off the board, and I found out why. He couldn't directly ping them, which is what his amulets want to do, and his deck doesn't run a heavy amount of followers, so he couldn't directly evolve anything and swing into this. So he basically stared out at, they evolved for 3/3s. He stared at 6 damage like a couple turns. Luckily enough, amulet heals like a lot, so he was able to heal out a lot of the damage I put in, but then as the game got later, you know, we got more mana, I started playing harder like cards that beat even more face in, and then long story short, he got killed that way, and I actually ended in 22 life because I also healed at some point. So there's that. Alice's Adventure, this is another Fable card. This card just says play 2, search your deck for a Fable. Any Fable in your deck, you can search for it. This card is really good for that first effect. The second effect is decent. The second effect says you can remove this for 1, and you can select a Fable flower on your field and give it Russian Assail. Assail means that you can swing into stood units, so if there's something stood like this, you can then, you know, swing into it basically. If stuff is rested is usually the only time you can swing into it, but if it's stood, you can also attack it. Rush just means you can also smash into it. Usually cards aren't Summoner Sickness, but this lets it so that they get out of Summoner Sickness. The first effect is mainly why I run this card, because you want to find certain pieces at certain parts of the game. I will say opening this card feels kind of butt cheeks if you already have good cards in your hand. But late game, if you're top decking this card is absolutely disgustingly nuts. This card will completely turn the game in your favor. If you open this on like a 7 or 8 mana turn, you basically win the game there if you already set up it. Or if you're in top deck mode, meaning you already discard your entire hand, you already Humpty Dumpty. If you top deck into this, you will come right back into action. You're right back into playing the game. And this card definitely fulfills a lot of that roles. There are a couple times where the Rush of Sale will come up, and there are times where you actually want to swing, and in those situations that extra part of that effect does come up, but that is so much rarer than the first effect. So there's that. Basically your searcher. Those are our 3s. We're gonna first talk about Tin Soldier. Tin Soldier is just an absolutely disgusting card. It is completely carrying majority of this deck. I will say this deck has a really good well-oiled machinery going behind it, where there's just a lot of good cards in one big package, but this card is kind of like the centerpiece of it all. It's kind of the card that helps the package stay alive. If this card didn't exist, the deck would just not be a deck basically. But basically this card says when it's placed anywhere other than from hand, you can put a Fable on it, and that's again the Fable counters. And the second effect is a very simple effect. It says remove a Fable counter on it and deal your opponent or an enemy foe on the field 2 damage. Now you'll be thinking like, oh, that's not really important, but when you have like 4 stacks, like say you have 4 little because you can stack them. They have 4 Fable stacks. That's 8 damage you're doing to your opponent, or 8 damage you can deal to something, or you can split the damage around. You can deal 2 to something, then deal another 2 to something else, deal 4 to something. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be specific to like one thing. The fact that you can target the board with it is really disgusting, and there's so many ways to get this card out. As I mentioned, Freya can also rest herself to give this a counter. You can call this off of a top 5 card that we have that we'll be talking about. You can search this off of Tea Time and then play it. You can play this from the EX zone. The Peon Prince can bring this card out from Grave. There's just so many ways you can activate this card. Alice, by the way, which we talk about in a second, Alice like gets this card of Fable as well. You'd be surprised just how quickly you can burn your opponent down with just this card alone. But the biggest thing about it is that your opponent can't play around this. Sometimes you don't want to swing, or you don't want to like attack because it opens up to certain plays your opponent has access to, and this card basically says that that's just not happening. Your stuff stays stood and you don't have to do anything. The fact that you're never actually attacking is the biggest part, that you can just directly deal your opponent damage without actually doing anything, and I think that's the biggest thing about this card that makes it so broken. We're going to talk about Alice here because Alice is basically the other end. The other part of this that's very important is the other meat and bones that kind of helps this whole engine work together. Her effect says when you place her onto the field, you basically put a Fable counter on her, and then she says you can remove a Fable counter. By the way, it's not once per turn. This is also not once per turn. You can remove Fable counter from her and put it on anything else, including your EX zone. Important, so if you have a Tin Soldier in EX zone, you can put on him. If you have a Snow White, you can put on her. I also run Rapunzel. You can put on Rapunzel. You have a couple places. You can put on another Alice. So say you have one EX zone and one on play. You can take the Fables from here and move them over to the Alice in the EX zone. There's so many different interactions with this Fable. And by the way, this is what makes the deck kind of complicated, is knowing how to work with the EX zone, the graveyard, and the board. On top of your deck, on top of your cards. It's kind of like a lot of floating pieces going on top of also keeping track of where your Fables are going. Knowing when to play this and how to play it is like the difference between like a good Fable player, a good Haven Fable player, and like a bad Haven Fable player, I would say. Knowing how to maneuver between the EX zone and this is just super important. Thinking about like what potential you could find is super big. She has an evolve that also lets her take the top 4. Basically put 2 Fable cards into your EX zone, which is also a really big piece. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Rapunzel, and my golly goodness, I fought with my boyfriend for so long about this card. She has a very simple ability. It just says ward. And she also says if she doesn't have a Fable on her, she can't attack. Long story short, if she doesn't have one of these suckers on her, she just can't do anything. But she's a ward, and the biggest thing about her is her stats, which is what my boyfriend mentioned a bunch of times. She's a 3 cost, which is a 4/5 stat. This is super important because she deals 4 damage and she's a 5 shield. It is very hard to wipe this card unless you're playing like Abyss or something, or you're playing cards that directly deal 5, which there aren't many decks that do that. There are many decks that just directly deal that much damage that fast. Into Sword, this card is absolutely insane. If you open this and just place it there, they usually have to commit 2 or 3 cards to kill it off, especially if you place this like going first. Going first, if you drop this, it's like disgusting. Going second, she's definitely significantly weaker. Into Dragon, you can plop this early, and if they have to work a little bit harder to kind of knock this out as well. Also, just having access to her, she's also a Fable, which is something I didn't know until later. Because she's a Fable, she's also a searchable ward, which does come up. Into Dragon, you need wards. Into Sword, boards. So she's really good. I'm not gonna lie, I thought about cutting her back to 2 and putting Snow White to 3 because she is a 3 and Snow White is a 2, and the downside to her being a 3 is that she contests with Alice, and that can be a problem because sometimes you have to pick and choose which one you want to play. If you're going first, it's really easy. You play her on 3 and then you play Alice on 4 and evolve her, but going second, it gets a lot harder because you have less play points to work with, but you have the evolve points, so you can kind of step a little bit differently. But long story short, really good card. I recommend it. I don't know if I'm going to keep this card forever, probably not, especially with set 5 coming up, but currently she is definitely a really good card. This is Humpty Dumpty, a very funny looking card, probably my favorite card art. I know it sounds stupid. He's just such a funny looking dude. It's so funny to just throw this card on the board. Every time I show this card, people are like, what am I looking at? So this is Humpty Dumpty. Is a very simple effect. He just says he evolves for 0, and you might be wondering, oh god, that must be like a huge caveat. It is. So he's a 3/3, and on evolve he becomes a 4/4. And basically his effects is on evolve, you deal 5 to each follower on the field that includes your field, and then also deal 3 to your enemy leader, and you discard your entire hand. Now this part is very, very, very painful because not only are you board wiping yourself and your opponent, but you're also discarding your entire hand for it. So if you have a really good hand or certain pieces you want to keep in the hand, they gotta go. And that really, really sucks. And a lot of people play around where they'll force you to have to play the egg, and then what happens is you discard your good cards, and then you have to go into top deck mode. You don't have a hand anymore, so you're just going off of what your draw is. So very, very risky. Also, with Bellringer, this card's really cool because you can call the Bellringer and then the Bellringer will die, and you have to draw a card off of it, by the way, so you won't lose that. You also play cards like Trail of Light that kind of helps you replenish. If you discard your whole hand, the Trail of Lights will say, hey, they're back now. So that's also really cool. But overall, this is also, again, another Fable, so it is searchable as well, which is also a very key piece. If this wasn't searchable, I think this would be significantly worse in my opinion. But it's searchable, and then like I mentioned with the Andromeda here, let's go bring out back Andromeda. In case you have to go into this play, if you happen to find the Andromeda, guess what? Your board doesn't die. So that's the biggest key. This is the Amulet Tea Time. This card is absolutely cracked. I underestimated this card at some point. I didn't realize how powerful this thing is. This thing is disgusting. This card says on play, top 5, look at your top 5 cards, call any Fable that's a 5 cost or less. There is not a single Fable currently that I know of that is above 5, so basically that's your entire deck. So they all just automatically activate. So you can activate Alice, which means gets a Fable. You can activate Tin Soldier, which means he'll get his Fable. You can activate Snow White, so she'll get her 3/3. You can activate Humpty Dumpty off of this. You can get Peon Prince. If you get Peon Prince, you are just really cooking gold, especially if it's like mid to late game where you already have like a Tin Soldier in drop. Absolutely disgusting, by the way. But wait, there's War. So just you get your top 5. Cool. You call a dude, you send the other 4 to the bottom. She has a second effect. She says you can kill her for 2 and revive any 3 cost or less Fable card to the into your and put it on the field. That is disgusting. So you can revive Tin Soldier this way, you can revive Alice this way, you can revive Humpty Dumpty this way. There are so many, you can revive Freya if you want to go for that approach. You can revive just basically the main cards, right? That's a lot of good cards you can revive. And Tin Soldier's Fable activate off of her as well. Alice's Fable activate off of her. You can evolve her. There's just so many things you can do. The fact that you can work with your grave is like huge, by the way, or it's called a cemetery. I'm sorry, the cemetery in this game, but basically your cemetery becomes accessible, which is huge because this card will help you finish games. On top of that, let's pretend you Humpty Dumpty at some point. You still have this card in the field. Guess what? You can still play the game because then you can revive cards again and keep going and not have to lose that momentum that you lose if you would discard your whole hand. That's her. Next are Acolyte's Light. This is a quick spell, the only quick spell I believe that I run. I actually ran quite a few different ones over the course of me testing Egg Haven. Basically, I found this to be the most useful one after a lot of testing. Israfil came out the set. Israfil is an 8/8 that heals on top of On Strike. She board wipes, and then she also on Evolve becomes a 10/10, and On Strike also deals a lot of damage. So long story short, you want Israfil gone, and you don't want to waste like 3-4 cards on her. That's way too much and not very friendly to your hand or whatever it is that you're trying to do. It is just not very cost efficient. So this card solves that problem. You see in Israfil, you snipe her. You see something huge like a Genesis Dragon, you snipe it. You see something like in Abyss, this is really useful if they're like trying to recursion some cards because Abyss likes to revive their cemetery cards, you snipe it. Oh, you see Ector from the luge guy from Abyss, cool, he's gone now. You see the Dominion, I think it's called Dominion, it's like the little ghost dude. You can snipe that too so they lose the recursion. Oh no, do you see a Summoner's Ghost? Snipe that, it's gone. The only downside to this card is that it's not searchable. I'm gonna lie, this card came up in almost every matchup today. And usually it was in my favor. I had one, I think the Haven Amulet dude straight up dropped like a really big ward, and I just went, cool, I'm just gonna banish it, and it's gone, and I had lethal because of it. I know it doesn't matter, you never want to do it, but if you really need to deny the draw, you can banish the Bellringer and they'll lose ability to draw. Keep in mind, last words abilities that like cards on death that would want to do something, this card plays around those type of cards. You can also banish the Elephant from Forest with a card like this as well. This is Peon Prince. I kind of neglected this card for about a week and a half like of testing, where I was like, maybe I'll just take this card out and just run Odette instead, and it worked pretty okay. But over time, I was playing some mirrors, and I just found that the Peon Prince has certain interactions that I wasn't really looking at, and I was like, maybe I need to bring the Peon Prince back. So I brought it back. This guy is very simple. You select a follower in your cemetery. Again, we are working with that grave, and you put it into your EX zone, and you can give it a Fable counter. This is huge. That means that if you have a Tin Soldier, he gets a Fable. If you have an Alice, she gets a Fable. If you have a Snow White, she gets a Fable. A Rapunzel, she gets a Fable. This is big because basically for 5 costs, you're putting something to EX zone, you're setting it up for a later turn. This is basically a setup card. It can be slow. This is the downside to this card, why I'm running it at 2. This card can be slow. This card, sometimes if you play this card on your 5 mana turn, it's like a big oof because you're really not doing much aside from just playing the card and passing turn. And if your opponent has like an insane board and this is all you're doing, you are in big trouble. And that's part of the reason why I was cutting it back a little bit. But however, it does have a second. It can be evolved, and it can be evolved into an assail card, which means it can attack stood cards. Now this does come up. There are a lot of times where it comes up. The other thing about it is its evolved form is a 5/6, which means if you were to have to Humpty Dumpty, he will actually still live with 1 life. Humpty Dumpty's 5, this will be a 6, so he will just barely live. And that way you can actually still have him on the board, and your opponent still has to snipe it and have to deal with it, so that's nothing to keep in mind. But the biggest thing is if your opponent has like a really scary dude on the board, you can basically rush, you can evolve and swing in and hope to murder it. It is going to be a 5/6, so it's going to do 5 damage. I've had to do that with Israfil before. I had an opponent have it was like in my practice games. They had like a stood Israfil, and I was like, all right, I'm going to evolve this dude, swing into it, and then use Tin Soldier to ping it down. It took a lot of work, but I got there, you know, like, so surprisingly enough, it was a pretty big commitment, but hey, we got there, and it does happen. But yeah, that's the Peon Prince. A lot of cute little interactions with him. If you're at like 10 mana turn and you have this in your hand, you should be winning the game. I'm not even gonna lie. Beast, this is the last card on the list, and it's just little Odette. This was originally a 3 of, and then they're cut back to 1. This was basically where the Peon Prince is. If I were to cut back, the Peon Prince would just go. I didn't really like this card at first. And I really like this card at set 4 because this buffs up your board. Basically, she has 2 effects that do the exact same thing. When you play her, you give 2 to your leader and 2 to every other follower in the field, and when she dies, you give 2 to your leader and every other follower in your field gets 2. You just basically buff up your opponent, your card's defense. There was actually a play I had where I plopped this down, had it live, and then this got put down, and that was disgusting, by the way. If she dies, you get the heal, which is nice. You can swing her into like a big body. You can use this card right here, the rabbit card. You can crack it, give it to her, swing her into a big body, let her die, let her buff up the rest of the board and heal herself. There's some small little interactions where she really comes up. I will say she is not perfect, but she is good to see. You definitely don't want to play around her. Like, you don't want to try and set up for her or anything like that, because the sadly people blow up boards like crazy. So you can't like just try to like build a board and then call her and hope that everything's gonna go well. It usually won't. I will say this and Rapunzel is a very disgusting combination. Just being able to have a 7 ward and this healing card on the board, on the, like, if you have something like this on the board, which has happened, I've had like a board state like this, my opponent just stares and goes, what do I do here? This is a 7 ward, and then this thing is gonna heal and just beef everything up again. Like, it's pretty funny. So it's a very funny combination. Doesn't come up too often, but when it does, it's pretty good. Let's go ahead and talk about the evolve zone real quick. We kind of talked to her about her briefly. On evolve, do the top 4, add 2 cards that are fable cards. It could be any fables, by the way. It doesn't have to be a follower, it could be spells too, and you basically put them in the EX zone, and and then she has the same effect as the regular Alice. You could take a fable counter off of her and put it somewhere else, so it's really useful. Here's Humpty Dumpty. Again, just evolve to deal 5 to everything, including your dudes too, and then discard your hand. And then we have the Assail Peon Prince. Again, just Assail to rush into stood cards. This is just very useful for that. And then last but not least, we have the Mainu. I just run him at 2. I've never had the 3rd evolve come up, thankfully. I didn't want the 3rd evolve to come up. I definitely had 2 come up quite often. And last but not least, I had this at 1 and had the bell ringer in this slot, but I eventually found that the 2nd did come up as well. And I think the same person that introduced me the Mainu was telling me the same thing about the prince, to buff up the prince to put the prince to 2. So there's that. It's about Amulet that was playing some Holy Falcons. These are the Holy Falcons that the Amulet plays, if you're wondering what that is. This card calls these cards out, basically. We're gonna do a really quick mulligan run. I just want to show you guys sort of what this deck looks like in action, because this is, you know, a pretty complicated deck, I think. Just to kind of put it all together, we're just gonna do like a really quick game. I rolled a 6. Nice. Opponent rolled a 1. All right, so basically, this is not the great. I would probably go first here. I'm not gonna lie, this is not the greatest hand to go first with. It might not be a bad idea to mulligan this, but hopefully it doesn't work us either. Let's see what our fresh hand's looking like. That's not terrible. We can work with this. So let's go ahead and get started. We know what our bottom 4 now are, so we're gonna go ahead and start us off. We're gonna play player 1. Probably call her out and pass. If the opponent doesn't do anything, which sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If they don't, we'll swing 2 at them. So bring them down. And then, long story short, here you have 2 options here. We can bell ringer or we can play rabbit. I'm gonna play the rabbit here under the assumption that they're not rushing us like crazy, which is very possible. It does happen. But we're gonna play it with like a normal game state in mind, where we can actually play the game. Because you'd be surprised, sometimes the sword will just completely explode on your face, and there's just nothing you can do about it. It does happen. But we'll go ahead and play the Alice and pass turn. If they answer this, they'll answer it. Let's pretend they do, and then that'll basically end their turn. We'll start ours. We'll go ahead and draw, and we'll probably just play Rapunzel here, ward her and pass, basically just telling our opponent like, hey, you have to deal with this. And then if they can't deal with this, then we're fine. If they do deal with this, we're cool. Usually they'll try to answer this, or they'll ping it down, or they'll bounce it. They'll do a couple things, but sometimes they can't answer this. So if they can't answer it, we'll just start our turn, and then from here on out, we'll basically play the Alice. Alice will get a Fable. Nice. We'll use our evolve points here. We'll use our evolve to basically bring her nice. Out with the Fable on, and then we can also Fable this, by the way, but we're gonna go ahead and check what our top 4 is looking like. Top 4 is looking pretty good here. We got a couple options. I am gonna go for the Tea Time and the Humpty Dumpty here as our EX zone additions. Our Fable is probably just gonna go ahead and move over to our Rapunzel, and we'll swing with Rapunzel, dealing our opponent 4. And that's basically the end of that. I usually like to keep this stood, so I will usually keep this stood, so that's what I'm gonna do there. They're probably gonna nuke this at this point, so she'll die. Sometimes the Alice will die, sometimes she'll stay. Let's pretend they do kill her, just to kind of keep it a little bit more standard to what normally would look like. So now we have a situation where we can kind of play a couple cards. We can play Bell Ringer, we can do a couple things, but actually I'm just gonna go ahead and activate Tea Time. We have seen quite a bit of Fable cards, so we're probably not gonna hit anything too juicy, but hey, Anything's possible. And actually, we hit probably the best target we could have, which is the Peon Prince here. We can call the Snow White if we need the board, but we're definitely going to go for the Peon Prince. In this situation, the Peon Prince is absolutely disgusting. This is like really, really great turn 4 play, because the Peon Prince will activate. We're actually going to take our Alice that died and put her in the zone and give her a Fable counter. And that's a really good setup, by the way. All we really need now is the Tin Soldier, which we have one in hand, but maybe we'll find another one. Basically, we'll just pass it with this being stood. Chances are this will either get pinged down or killed, or we'll probably just die. We'll just let it die. We'll draw. We drew an Acolyte, which is also just really, really good. We're at 6 mana now. Oh, we had 1 mana floating before, so we could have definitely Bellringer. So we're just gonna Bellringer and draw off of the previous one. Oh, we have quite a beautiful hand here. So we have a couple options here. We're at 6. We can play this out differently. We can Andromeda and Humpty Dumpty here. We can also remove this to do some stuff, or we can play a couple stood cards and kind of just leave them stood, which I think is what I'm going to go after. Sometimes I play this game where I actually want people to kill the Tin Soldier. So I think what we're going to do here is we are going to play the Mainu for 2. And then we're just going to very casually bring out this Alice here, and we're going to go ahead and give her another Fable. We're going to evolve her. Hope we see some juicy stuff here. And we definitely, wow, we saw a lot of juicy stuff here. So we're definitely going to put the Alice in here, because this is really good for us. And probably another Tea Time. Honestly, these are also really good options. If you need to ward, you can put this in as well. If you need the Freya for game to try and close out the Tin Soldier, you can go the Tin Soldier route. We're gonna go ahead and definitely do that. We're gonna take these Fables and move them over here. And actually, that leaves us, we use 5 fate points. I don't think that leaves us with anything else. What I would do here is I would actually keep the board stood into some matchups. Try and see if they can answer it, because keep in mind this is Aura. They actually can't touch this, so this will probably be just 2 free damage for you to work with. We can't evolve it sadly because we have to evolve the Alice, but you can just leave your board stood here. If you feel like this is too much stuff on your board, you can also just crack one of these just to crack it, just to get it off the field. That's another approach. Probably gonna try and kill the Alice. I would be surprised if they didn't, but this might actually live. So let's pretend that that's exactly what happens. Let's pretend we also take some damage somewhere here, because we definitely haven't been. So we're gonna go ahead and draw. We have 6 cards to work with. This is quite a beautiful board state we have going on here. So we're gonna go ahead and swing or crash into something with this, which ideally we want to crash into something to kind of get off the board or deal 2 direct damage. And we have a couple plays here. We can go ahead and play the Bellringer. Call out, we have 7 points to work with. Call out the Humpty here, and then we can play the Andromeda, and then we can basically kill this. And that's this is 1, 4, 5 8 points. And then we can basically evolve the Humpty.
That's nice.
And keep our board stood. And if you want to keep the Bellringer alive, you can, or if you want, you can nuke the Bellringer first before playing Andromeda, and that way you can get the draw. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it like this. If you want to ward this, you can. It just depends on the matchup. Some matchups like to attack into stuff and deal other stuff damage, so if you feel that's a problem, you do that. Otherwise, you basically just, since we dealt 3. Basically, this is just a protection if you need it. Let's probably play it normally, like as if we would ward it. We'll ward it, we'll let it die. We'll draw an Rapunzel off of it. Let's pretend they will definitely want this off the board, so let's pretend they kill that, and then leave us with an Andromeda. We're gonna go ahead and start us off. We have another Acolyte, so that's actually the Acolyte will come up depending on the matchup. We also, another thing we could have done, we actually could have nuked this for 2 points and actually brought out the Tin Soldier. And also had him standing as well. And actually, in that situation, a lot of people will go after the Tin Soldier and actually not touch the egg. So chances are this will be our end board state, which is perfect. So we're at 8 mana now. We have basically close to lethal here. Pretending they don't have wards or anything crazy, we can swing for 6 here.
That's nice.
And then basically we have game. Under the assumption that they can't answer it. But we basically have game here. We're very close to game anyway. We have to deal 5 more points. We have 8 mana to work with. We definitely have a lot of setup that we can do, but I think the ideal setup here is we want to revive the Tin, so we'll just play her for 4.
That's nice.
We're gonna go ahead and check our top 5, and voila, we got game without even having to do too much. That's really funny. So we're gonna go ahead and play the Tin here. Basically, we're just gonna bottom deck these. Give a Fable to 10. Actually, that isn't game. Close to game, but it's not quite game. Trying to think if we had a better play there, but no, I think that's fine. will basically give Tin of Fable to deal 2 direct to our opponent, leaving us with this, with them having 3 life. So all we have to do here is crack this for 2. Oh, we don't have an egg. We don't have an egg, so we can't crack that for 2. We have a couple options. We can, we're working with 4 mana here. We can ward up to kind of just save time, but I actually think what we're gonna do here is we're actually gonna crack this. Call the Tin out again. And then we're basically gonna deal 2 more. It will leave them with 1 life. We still have 2 more. 2 more things we can work with. We can crack this to maybe potentially kill something on the field, and then we'll give it to them. But I think after this, they should be able. We should have games. So they're probably gonna blow this all up. It's probably all gonna die because it's pretty normal. And we're gonna draw. We drew to another Tin, and the Tin is definitely gonna be game because then we can play the Tin normally for 3. Call out Alice, she'll get 3 stacks, and then we move the 3 stacks here and deal our opponent basically 6, and it'll be game. There's a bunch of lines of play, definitely different setups you can do. Every game will be different and tiered differently depending on what they're playing, what they're calling. You usually react to what your opponent's doing a lot of the time. This is a control deck to a certain degree. You want to play as a control deck. And then obviously like cards like Acolyte could have been activating. We opened both of them actually this game, so there might have been a chance that I might have, instead of like maybe calling a ward, I might have been playing this, or instead of cracking that rabbit, maybe I played this. If they called like a big body, I'd nuke it. But that's basically it. All right, fam, and that is basically my Haven top 4 deck. That is everything I could think of so far in terms of my knowledge of the game and everything I know, everything I could have shown you so far. Like I said, it's kind of matchup dependent and things change from matchup to matchup, but I really had a really great time playing this deck. I absolutely love this deck. This was probably one of the funnest decks I played. Last but not least, before I close out, you might notice that I'm missing a card. It's Explosion. It's another Fable card that people run. It's a spell. I don't run that card because it clogged my hand so much that it never felt worth it, but it is a good card to run. I don't disagree with running it, but it increases the high roll of the deck. I prefer having the 1-drops to kind of keep the game going instead of having these random eggs that can sometimes go off and sometimes can't. Another really good side card is Jean and Dark Jean. Those are also very good cards to play. There's some people who also run Snake Princess as another board option. I really enjoyed this deck. I'm definitely going to be competing more in Shadowverse. This was my first ever regional for Shadowverse, and I've watched my boyfriend play like basically a month and a half ago, and I thought that was really cool. I've never played myself. I recently did a shop challenge where I also won one of the demoniums with the little token on it. Also did really well in there, so there's that. So that also, I was running the same list. I think I made 1 change, and I might have been just adding the second copy of the Prince. I think I might have been running Bellringer with the Revolve form at some point, but that was basically it. So I actually have performed well with this list before, and then here we are again. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys found this video enjoyable. Please like, subscribe, comment, do all that fun stuff. I do have my wonderful teammates Di and Tyler. I was playing Ramp Dragon, and Tyler was playing Abyss. He was playing Ector Abyss, a very, very cool list where he basically utilized that Israfil. That deck can be a monster, actually. Again, big shout outs to everyone that helped me learn the game this fast. I would say I did pretty well for a month. Peace out. That's without you guys. I'll see you guys in a future video. Bye!